Kansas, 1889. Central Market Square still bore the scars of the flood. Mud clinging to the undersides of wagon wheels. The air heavy with wet hay and rotting grass. Vendors, desperate to salvage what they could, laid out bruised apples, damp sacks of grain, and second-hand boots drying in the weak sunlight. Through the thinning crowd came a wagon with one broken wheel, its driver yanking the reins before stopping abruptly in the square's center. In the back sat a gaunt woman, hair tangled from days without care. Her body folded into a crude wheelchair of mismatched iron wheels and rough planks. She clutched a worn wool blanket as though it were the last thing tethering her to the world. This one can't walk, can't bear children, and eats more than she earns, the man announced, his voice slicing through the market chatter. Anyone wants her, take her. If not, she stays for the dogs. A ripple of uneasy laughter and mutters passed through the crowd. She looks like a broken doll, someone whispered. Poor thing, an old milk seller murmured, shaking her head. Pity's one thing, feeding's another. Who'd take her? Mara Ellis sat straight-backed, her eyes dry, unflinching. She studied the faces before her as one might study floodwaters, knowing some would drown and others would fight. From the edge of the square, a tall man in a worn brown coat watched without speaking. Boone Kessler didn't move until the driver turned away to spit. Then he stepped forward, boots splashing in shallow puddles, and took hold of the wheelchair's handles. She's not garbage, Boone said. I'll take her to my ranch. The man swung around, scowling. She's my family's property. I didn't say you could. She's breathing. Boone cut in, voice low but carrying. That makes her a person. The man's lip curled. You think you can just. I can, Boone replied. And I will. The driver jumped down, squaring his shoulders. She's under my roof. Eats my bread. You want her, you pay. You're not selling a mule, Boone said evenly. And I'm not buying a life. Then she's not yours to take. Boone straightened, released the chair, and turned to face the crowd. His voice rang like a gunshot. If anyone here thinks a human life is worth less than a horse, try and stop me. Silence settled over the square. No one moved. Boone angled the wheelchair toward the edge of the market. The driver cursed under his breath but didn't follow. As they left, Mara's voice, soft but steady, reached him. Do you do this for attention? I don't need attention, Boone said, not looking down. I need to see you live. The wagon wheels faded behind them, replaced by the crunch of Boone's boots and the creak of the chair's axles. The prairie stretched long and empty, grass swaying under the sinking sun. By the time they reached Boone's ranch gate, the land was bathed in gold. He wheeled Mara across the yard, up to a small back porch, and opened the door to a narrow cedar-scented hallway. At the far end was a tidy room. A single bed with fresh sheets, a folded quilt, a wooden chest, and a narrow window overlooking the wheat fields. The oil lamp on the table was full and trimmed. You had this ready, Mara said. I had a room, Boone replied, parking her chair. Now it's yours. She moved herself inside without help. I can manage. I know. That evening, she unpacked her threadbare blanket and meager belongings, refusing assistance. Boone didn't intrude. He left a tray outside her door, stew, bread, water, and walked away without waiting. It became a quiet rhythm. A knock, a meal, no intrusion unless she called. He never entered without her permission. One morning, she found a folded linen handkerchief on her pillow. Edges, the man drew a folded paper from his coat. I'm her husband's uncle. She was left on our land. This says she's to be returned. Family property gone astray, worth a debt's payment. Mara gripped the arms of her chair, her pulse pounding. I am not. Boone moved between them, his shadow falling over her. One hand rested, casual but not idle, on the butt of his revolver. In this place, he said evenly, property doesn't breathe, and she's breathing just fine. The man's mouth tightened. That paper's legal. Then take it to someone who cares more for ink than blood, Boone replied, his voice quiet but heavy enough to thicken the air. The uncle's gaze sharpened. You'll regret crossing us. Maybe, Boone said, but not today. The man hesitated, then swung into his saddle. Dust rose as he rode toward the road. Boone stayed where he was until the rider vanished, then turned back. Mara was still staring at him. Her hands loosened from the chair, but her heart still racing. You didn't have to. Yes, Boone said. I did. That's twice you've pulled me from the fire. Then maybe it's time we stop letting folks throw you in. She met his gaze and understood. He hadn't just given her shelter. He had made a promise. The next morning carried the cool breath of late spring. Boone led a saddled bay mare into the yard. Something curious bolted to the leather. Half a chair built from polished pine and iron. Mara wheeled closer. What is that? A frame that locks into the stirrups, Boone said, patting the mare's neck. Lets you sit steady without your legs holding you. Thought you might want to ride again. Her fingers tightened on her chair. I haven't ridden since. I know, but if you want to try, this'll keep you in the saddle. If I fall, then you fall, Boone said simply, and get back up. She drew a breath. I'll do it. He helped her to the mounting block, then into the frame. It held her snug, hips level, torso upright. The mare shifted once, patient beneath her. Take the reins. The first steps were awkward, the mare uncertain of her new burden. Boone walked beside her, silent, letting her feel the sway. By the third circuit she was smiling, until the mare stumbled on a rut. The frame tilted and Mara pitched sideways, hitting the ground hard. Boone stayed a pace away. Are you going to just stand there? She asked. You need my hand? She hesitated, then shook her head. Not yet. Took 3 tries, but she climbed back into her chair. Again. Boone's eyes narrowed, not in doubt, but in measure. All right. She fell twice more before asking for his help. He lifted her with care. That's enough for today. No, she said firmly. One more. They rode until the sun dipped low. When she finally stopped, she was streaked with dust and sweat, her hair loose, but her eyes burned with something fierce. That night, as she mended her apron, she noticed Boone at the table with her torn riding skirt in his lap, a spool of thread in hand. You sew? My mother taught me, said a man who can fix his clothes won't go begging. You didn't have to do that. I know. When he finished, he smoothed the skirt once. Their eyes met in the lamplight. No pity, only respect. Tomorrow we'll try the south pasture. Smoother ground. All right, she said, fingers brushing the strong new stitches. By afternoon, the wind carried the smell of rain, though the clouds hadn't yet gathered. Boone had left at dawn for the county seat, telling her, keep the doors barred. Don't open for anyone. Mara nodded, Samuel asleep in his crib. The yard was still, chickens moving slow in the heat. She was peeling potatoes when she spotted movement beyond the fence. 4 riders, scanning the buildings with the ease of ownership. They stopped near the barn. The tallest, in a tattered gray coat, dismounted and strode toward the porch. 2 others drifted toward the corral. Mara slid the bolt on the door, then took Boone's rifle from its hooks. Heavy, cold. Anyone home? The man called, knocking. Looks quiet. Maybe we just help ourselves. Mara eased the window open, sighting down the barrel. She aimed at the dirt an inch before his boot and fired. The crack split the air. Dust leapt. Hell! Who's shooting? She chambered another round. Next shot isn't the ground. He froze, staring at the window. Lady, you got no call. The second shot splintered a fence rail inches from his hand. The corral men dropped their lead rope. The tallest raised his hands and stepped back toward his horse. We don't want trouble. Then ride, Mira said. For a heartbeat, the men hesitated. maybe weighing whether a woman in a chair could hold them off for long. Then another shot cracked the air. A warning this time. The bullet shaved a tuft of grass just shy of the corral gate. The mayor stamped and snorted. The men swung into their saddles without another word, turning their horses toward the horizon. They rode hard, dust boiling up behind them until they were only specks. Mara kept the rifle trained until even the dust was gone. Only then did she lower it across her lap, exhaling slow. When Boone returned near dusk with the wagon heavy with seed, the first thing he noticed was the faint tang of gunpowder on the air. Then the fresh gouges in the dirt. Then the shattered rail along the fence. Inside, Mara sat at the table peeling potatoes. The rifle leaned against the wall as though it had always been there. Boone hung his hat and stepped in. What happened here? She met his eyes. For men came for the barn. And the horses. His glance shifted to the rifle. And you stopped them? I didn't stop them, she said evenly. I protected my home. Boone studied her for a moment. Then a slow, genuine smile broke the hard lines of his face. Remind me never to cross you, Miss Mara. Her lips curved faintly. You're safe. You're not stealing my grain. He chuckled and turned toward the window, looking out over the quiet yard. The sacks of seed rustled in the wagon outside, the only sound between them for a while. Finally, Boone said, You did well. Mara didn't answer, but her hands moved more steadily on the potato knife. She hadn't just defended his land. She'd defended hers. That night, rain swept in without warning, silver sheets blown in from the west. On the tin roof, it drummed steady and relentless. Boone sat on the porch steps, lantern glow painting the wet yard gold. Mara rolled her chair to the open doorway, a shawl over her shoulders. You'll be soaked through, she said. I don't mind. They listened to the rain together, the scent of damp earth and cedar drifting in. There was a time, Boone said slowly, when I wanted to quit living. Mara's hands tightened on the armrests. After my mother died, he continued. Fever. Nothing the doctor could do. I was 19. Thought I could keep the ranch going, but the cattle starved that winter. Fences rotted. Everything I touched died. Rainwater dripped from the brim of his hat. I'd sit out here at night, listening to coyotes, wondering if it'd be better to just stop. Mara's eyes softened, but she stayed silent. Boone turned his head. You ever think like that? She looked down at her hands. The day of the flood. Her voice was quiet, but steady. The river swelled so fast. I was in the kitchen. My husband was outside, shouting for me to take the high trail. I saw him slip. The current took him under the fence. I went after him. The water was black, freezing. I thought I could reach him. Her breath caught. I remember the cold more than anything. It made my arms heavy. I grabbed his coat once, but the current tore it away. After that, nothing. I woke on the riverbank. The sky was gray. My legs, she swallowed hard. They weren't mine anymore. Couldn't feel them. Couldn't even shiver. He was gone, and I was half of what I'd been. You were still in the water when you lost the use of your legs, Boone said. She nodded. But I kept swimming. Don't know why. Maybe because stopping felt worse. The rain filled the silence between them. You're stronger than I'll ever be, Boone said quietly. Mara's gaze lifted to meet his. Then be strong with me. The words hung there. Steady. Sure. Boone rose from the steps and came to her. He crouched beside her chair, rain still clinging to his beard. His hand covered hers, not as an owner to the rescued, not as a man to the fragile, but as one survivor to another. She turned her hand under his, holding on, and he stayed there until the rain eased and the lantern began to sputter from the damp. When he finally stood, he said nothing. But at the door, Mara's voice stopped him. Boone! Thank you for telling me. He nodded once, eyes meeting hers, then shut the door. The fading rain was the only sound, his hand still warm in her memory. The frost had barely left the ground when Boone began building. 2 mornings in a row, Mara woke to the sound of a hammer long before breakfast. She wheeled to the window and saw him working bare-armed in the cold dawn, breath steaming. By the 3rd day, posts stood in the yard, a slanted roof braced to the east. When he came in for water, she asked, "What are you building?" "You'll see," he said with a half-smile. 2 days later, he knocked on her door. "Come outside." The air smelled of cedar shavings and damp soil. He pushed her chair to the new structure. Morning light poured under the fresh roof, warming a long trough of turned earth. "It's the best light on the ranch," Boone said. "For sunflowers." She remembered telling him, months ago, that they were her favorite. He placed a small sack of seeds in her lap. "This is your patch, your garden." Her fingers sank into the soil. Dark, rich, alive. Something in her chest loosened. They planted together in silence. Boone fetching water, Mara pressing each seed into place. By the time they finished, her shawl had slipped from her shoulders, and she didn't bother pulling it back. She sat in the center of the patch, hands stained brown, hair loose around her face. Boone leaned on the fence post, watching her smile, full and unguarded. "You look," he paused, searching. "I look what?" she teased. "Alive," he said. Her smile softened. She looked away, letting the sun warm her skin. Boone stepped closer, resting a hand on the back of her chair. "If you ever need a name to sign on a letter," he said, "I'd like it to be mine." She turned, the words sinking in. "I don't have a ring, no speech ready, but I have this land, and I have what I feel for you. If you want my name, it's yours." For a long moment, nothing moved but the breeze. A meadowlark called beyond the barn. Mara's eyes brimmed, but her smile grew. "Boone Kessler," she said softly. "That would make me Mara Kessler. That would make you whatever you want to be," he replied. She reached for his hand. "Then yes." Tears slid warm against her cheeks, but she didn't look away. Boone's grip tightened. "Good," he murmured. "Then we'll tell the sunflowers when they bloom." They stood together, watching the morning light spill over the earth they had just planted. The seeds lay hidden beneath the soil, but Mara felt something had already begun to grow. Spring had returned to the Keeter Ranch, and with it, the sound of young voices where once there had been only wind in the grass. The yard was alive with motion and sound, the air humming with the quiet rhythm of a place that had learned to survive. Women in full, faded skirts moved between lines heavy with drying laundry, their arms quick and sure. Children darted past like minnows, weaving between sheds and barrels, their laughter cutting through the afternoon hum. Near the far fence, an old soldier mended a broken post with the patience of a man who had once built barricades under fire. It had begun simply, one widow with no kin to take her in, a boy orphaned by fever. Then another had come and another still. Boone had never asked their stories. The details belonged to them. But Mara had, listening quietly, writing each name in a worn leather journal along with a single note of the first thing they smiled about here. On one page she had written, "This is the place where women sleep without fear." That morning, Boone stood in the corral, reins in hand, steadying a gentle bay mare whose ears flicked forward at every sound. A small girl sat stiff in the saddle, her knuckles white. "Easy," Boone said, voice low, calm as the stillest water. "Feel the ground through her feet. She'll tell you when she's ready." He walked beside the mare, murmuring encouragement until the tension eased from the child's shoulders. Across the yard, Maya knelt in the garden with 3 young women, setting seedlings into neat rows. One of them glanced toward the corral and whispered, "He's real patient with her." Mara smiled without looking up from her work. "He's always patient with those who think they cannot." By midday, the smell of baking bread curled from the kitchen windows, warm and yeasty. People moved in and out, trading tools, calling each other by name, sharing small jokes. The ranch was no longer just a ranch, it had become a decision to stay. Late in the afternoon, a lone rider appeared on the ridge, a dark silhouette against the amber light. Boone's posture shifted, the easy curve of his shoulders tightening. Mara recognized the figure immediately. Her late husband's uncle, narrow-shouldered, with a mouth drawn thin from years of discontent. He rode into the yard without greeting, his eyes sweeping over everything, fences, gardens, people, before landing on her. "I hear you've got quite a collection here," he said. "And my nephew's widow, still living on your charity." Boone stepped forward, placing himself between the man and Mara. "I came for what's mine," the uncle said, the words sharp as broken glass. "She was married into my family. That makes her." "You will not like the end of that sentence," Boone cut in, his voice low enough to carry weight. The man's gaze shifted, and he finally saw them. Not just Boone and Mara, but the others. A dozen strong, silent figures stood watching. The old soldier leaned against the fence, arms crossed. The women in the garden held their tools like weapons. Even the little girl in the corral now sat with Boone's rifle across her lap. The uncle's jaw worked, but he tugged the reins hard and turned his horse. "Keep her," he muttered, riding away without looking back. When the dust had settled, Mara let out a slow breath. "He will not come again," Boone said quietly. "I know," she replied. That night, she wrote in her journal, "I was once left in a marketplace like a broken thing. But one man saw me. Not the legs I had lost, but the heart that had not broken." Weeks bled into months. Mara kept at her exercises, pushing harder each time, Boone's steady hand always nearby. The town doctor had given little hope for movement, but Boone had never repeated his words. One morning, she felt it, a tremor deep in her thigh. Boone was there in an instant, his arm firm around her. Through summer and into autumn she practiced, first standing with both hands gripping the porch rail, then a single step, then two. Boone never hurried her, never let her fall. Every night he lifted her into bed. Every morning he was there when she rose. One cool afternoon, Boone was splitting wood, the axe rising and falling in the crisp air. Mara pushed herself from her chair, gripped the rail, and began the long walk toward him. Slow, deliberate, each step a victory. When he turned and saw her, she said simply, "Boone, we are going to have a child." For a heartbeat, he could only stare. Then the axe dropped into the dirt, and he caught her up, spinning her until her laughter filled the yard. When he set her down, his forehead rested against hers. "You have given me 2 lives today," he said, breathless. "No," Mara whispered, her hands curling at his neck. "We gave them to each other." The sun dipped low, setting the fields aflame with gold. And on the Kessler Ranch, the place of the survivors, life went on stronger than before. It became more than land and fences. It became a promise. A place where the broken were never discarded. Where survival was only the first step toward something greater. Mara and Boone's story is not about rescue. It is about 2 people finding the courage to live again, and giving that courage to everyone who came after. If you want more tales of grit, love, and second chances under the wide western sky, subscribe to Wild West Love Stories. Out here, every heartbeat is worth telling. If you want, I can also stretch this into an even longer cinematic version with more tension in the uncle's confrontation and deeper internal thoughts for Mara and Boone, so it feels like a full chapter. That would make it much richer and double its emotional weight. The autumn winds carried with them the scent of wood smoke and ripened apples from the orchard. The ranch's days fell into a rhythm, work at first light, laughter by the cook fire at dusk. Children chased each other across the yard, while the older ones mended fences or gathered eggs. New arrivals came in 1s and 2s, often quiet at first, but before long their voices joined the chorus of life. Mara's strength returned slowly but steadily. Every step she took was a victory. Every chore she managed without help a quiet triumph. Boone noticed them all, though he never said much, just that steady nod or the faintest curve of his mouth. One evening, after everyone had gone to bed, Mara found him sitting alone on the porch, hat in his lap, eyes on the dark hills. "You're thinking again," she said, easing herself down beside him. "Always," he replied, "about keeping this place safe, about what happens if I can't." Mara reached over and laid her hand on his. "You've built more than a ranch, Boone. You've built something people would fight for. You won't have to do it alone." The truth of her words came sooner than either of them expected. 3 days later, a hard-riding stranger appeared, dust rising behind his horse like a storm cloud. He wore no badge, but his voice carried authority when he called out Boone's name. News had traveled. Too many folks on the edge of the county were whispering about the Kessler Ranch harboring outcasts, runaways, and those better sent back where they belonged. The stranger's eyes swept the yard, pausing on the women, the children, the old soldier leaning on the fence. "You're keeping people here who ought to be in town or jail." Boone stepped forward, shoulders square. "They're under my roof. That makes them my responsibility." The man's jaw tightened. "Responsibility can get you killed." "Maybe," Boone said evenly, "but it's better than living with the kind of cowardice that lets good people get hurt." Behind him, the ranch had gone still. Mara, the young women, the children, they all stood watching. No one moved, but the air was thick with unspoken solidarity. The stranger held Boone's gaze for a long moment, then gave a short, cold nod and rode off without another word. When the sound of hooves faded, Boone turned toward the porch. Mara was smiling, just slightly, but with the surety of someone who knew they had just witnessed a line being drawn in the dirt. The yard bustled, women in layered skirts pinning laundry to swaying lines while children darted between sheds in a game only they understood. Near the back fence, an old soldier worked the rails with the slow, steady patience of someone who had learned long ago not to waste a single motion. It had started small. First a widow with nowhere to go, then a boy orphaned by fever. Then another came, and another. Boone never asked for their stories. Mara did. In her lap she kept a worn leather journal, each name written beside a note of the first thing they smiled about here. On one page, she'd scrawled in looping ink, "This is the place where women sleep without fear." That morning, Boone stood in the corral, reins in hand, steadying a patient gray mare. A little girl sat stiff in the saddle, her back straight as a fence post. "Easy," Boone told her, his voice low. "Feel the ground through her feet. She'll tell you when she's ready." The mare stood nearby, arms crossed, saying nothing, just watching. Boone walked alongside the mare, murmuring encouragement. Across the yard, Mara knelt in the soil with 3 young women, setting seedlings into neat rows. One of them glanced toward the corral. "He's real patient with her," she said. Mara smiled faintly. "He's always patient with those who think they cannot." By midday, the smell of baking bread drifted from the kitchen. People came and went, trading jokes, carrying tools, calling each other by name. The ranch was no longer just a patch of land and a few buildings, it was a choice to stay. Late in the afternoon, a lone rider appeared on the ridge. Boone's posture changed immediately, his spine straightening, his hand tightening on the reins. Mara knew the shape of those narrow shoulders, the pinched line of that mouth. Her late husband's uncle. He rode into the yard without so much as a greeting. "I hear you've got quite a collection here," he said, eyes sweeping the place. "And my nephew's widow still breathing on your charity." Boone stepped forward, shifting just enough to block Mara from view. "You heard right," Boone said. "I came for what's mine," the uncle snapped. "She was married into my family. That makes her." "You won't like the end of that sentence," Boone cut in, voice low and steady. The man's gaze shifted, and he saw them. Not just Boone and Mara, but a dozen strong, silent people watching from across the yard. The old soldier at the fence, arms crossed. The young women in the garden with tools in hand. Even the girl on the mare, now holding Boone's rifle across her lap. The uncle's jaw worked. Finally, he yanked his reins. "Keep her," he muttered, riding off without looking back. When the sound of hooves faded, Mara let out a slow breath. "He won't come again," Boone said. "I know," she answered. That evening, Mara opened her journal and wrote, "I was once left in a marketplace like a broken thing. But one man saw me, not the legs I lost, but the heart that did not break." Weeks bled into months. Mara kept at her exercises, pushing harder with Boone's steady hand nearby. The town doctor had given her little hope for movement, but Boone never repeated it. One morning she felt it, a tremor in her thigh. Boone was there instantly, his arm anchoring her. Through summer into autumn, she practiced. First standing with both hands gripping the porch rail, then a step, then two. Boone never hurried her, never let her fall. Every night he lifted her into bed. Every morning he was there when she rose. One cool afternoon, Boone was splitting wood, the axe steady in the crisp air. Mara pushed herself from her chair, gripped the rail and stepped, slow, deliberate, across the yard to him. He turned, startled, just as she said, "Boone, we are going to have a child." For a heartbeat he only stared. Then the axe slipped from his hand and thudded into the dirt. He caught her up, lifting her clear off her feet, spinning her until her laughter carried across the yard. When he set her down, his forehead rested against hers, his breath warm in the cooling air. "You have given me 2 lives today." "No," Mara whispered, her hands at his neck. "We gave them to each other." The sun dipped low, gilding the fields in gold. On the Kessler Ranch, the place of the survivors, life went on, stronger than ever. And that is how the Kessler Ranch became more than land and fences. It became a promise. A place where the broken were never thrown away. Where survival was not the end of the road, but the beginning of something unshakable. Mara and Boone's story is not about rescue. It is about 2 people finding the courage to live again and giving that courage to everyone who came after. If you want more tales of grit, love, and second chances under the wide western sky, make sure you subscribe to Wild West Love Stories, because out here, every heartbeat is worth telling.